It's been a while since the latest chapters of Deltarune were released back in June, bringing with them an impressive amount of content to explore. Even so, the people in the community were quick to pick apart all of the secrets, piecing together the new information to solve what mysteries the previous two chapters left behind. Now that things have settled down a bit, and with chapter 5 coming out later this year, it's the perfect time to take a look back and analyze the latest chapters of Deltarune, from what made them great to my criticisms of them. But what aspects of the game will I be looking at? Simply put, it will be the design of the game, the characters and their growth, as well as what we should look forward to from Deltarune. In addition to this, at the end, I will reveal the truth behind the controversy, which tainted the community's image. However, before getting into things, I need to talk about the story for a brief moment, just so that we're all on the same page. If you are familiar with the story, or simply want to hear my opinion, I suggest skipping forward to the timestamp on screen. With that out of the way, let's dive into the analysis. The chapter opens up with Chris and Susie waking up on the couch in the dark world. Ralsei joins the two and they look for the dark fountain as per usual. Meanwhile, Susie tries convincing Ralsei about coming to the town's festival. However, there is a small problem. He isn't able to leave the dark world and, as a result, cannot join us. So they begin arguing. Just when tensions are high, an eccentric TV host named Tenna interrupts them, making them compete in his game show for a prize. They're not really sure what it is yet, but let's keep going. Tenna seems like a nice guy at first. In spite of this, as you snoop around his studio, his trustworthiness begins to dwindle. In one of the restricted areas, Tenna holds Toriel captive, and alongside her, the Dark Fountain can be seen. However, you get captured, and after the gang escapes, they manage to make their way backstage. But Tenna once again appears and challenges them to a fight, but unfortunately, he's defeated, sending him into a spiral. However, after being calmed down by Susie, he gives back Toriel. Oh! The Roaring Knight injures Tenna pretty badly, then fights and kicks our asses before getting attacked by police officer Undyne, only for her to get kidnapped. In a rush, you and Susie get up and chase after, but the knight escapes inside of the shelter. Fortunately, there's a way inside. It requires having knowledge of 3 codes, each one being tied to an important thing from town. Chris then enters the bunker, showing us that they know more than the player, and with it, bringing an end to the 3rd chapter. Chapter 4 begins slowly, as the main characters are still recovering from what happened last night. The objective now is simple: go to church to gather more clues on the bunker. Chris and Susie learn from Alphys that Noel's mom might have something to do with all of this. So Susie asks Noel if she would like to do the group project together, and after she reluctantly agrees, we go to investigate her home for clues about the code. However, while Susie distracts her in the previously inaccessible room, we actually manage to find the code. Oh, and Chris just ripped the soul out of their body. They lock you inside of a box, and you make your way back to the room, only for Chris to yet again attack you, and after a scuffle, puts the soul back into their body. However, just then, Carol, Noel's mom, kicks everyone out. You return home, but the door seems to be locked. So you and Susie have to return to church, as that is where Toriel and the key are supposed to be located. But unfortunately, a new dark fountain appeared, so we'll have to deal with it. This is getting old. The knight appears, tries to stop us, and to our dismay, actually succeeds, making you and Susie fall down to the ground below. Luckily, Ralsei finds us, and the 3 of you set out as usual. On the way, an old man joins and leads you to his study, where the door leading to the Roaring Knight resides. So you grab the equipment necessary to unlock the door. After climbing and chasing the knight with said equipment, it yet again manages to escape. Bummer. We then return to the fountain. Unexpectedly, once we're back in the light world, behind the door locked with a pad, there's black smoke coming from underneath it, meaning that a second dark world resides just behind it. Like I said, the door needs a passcode, so you and Susie go look for it around the church, and discover that the old man is dead. The code doesn't seem to be around here, So Suzy decides to reopen a dark world to ask the old man for help. Things go south, however, and we end up in a battle against him, though it really isn't the old man, but a statue, which fortunately Ralsei gets rid of. Suzy then gets mad at Ralsei. In the past, he kept a lot of things secret from us, and Ralsei finally breaks down, crying, explaining that he knows so many things he would rather just keep them secret for our own good. But he vows to do his best in revealing more information when needed, and nothing about the final prophecy. We'll see how that plays out. Returning a second time to the light world, you and Suzy open the last door to confront the knight. However, the Roaring Knight has one trick up its sleeve. It opens yet another dark fountain to summon a titan. But with some help from the old man, we manage to defeat it. You and Ralsei celebrate about the titan's defeat. However, this is short-lived since Suzy's gone ahead and got to see how the final prophecy ends, breaking the panel just before we get to it. She brushes it off by saying how we wouldn't let it happen, whatever it means. The last thing remaining is sealing the fountain, so you return home, and Chris goes to bed. But while trying to fall asleep, they receive a mysterious phone call. It mentions something about a promise, and then cut to black. Wow, that was a lot to talk about. Unless you skipped here, in which case I can actually get to the retrospective now. Deltarune doesn't stand out from a level design standpoint. It uses common tropes like how the correct path is most often to the right to subtly guide the player on the right track. But there are issues in regards to how some people felt tired of the same gameplay loop after the first two chapters, and the predictable room layouts with little to no incentive to explore around. Let's set one thing straight. Deltarune isn't a dungeon crawler RPG. You're not meant to find all secrets in one go. It's a game about a group of heroes on a quest to save the world. It's a character-driven story filled with heartfelt moments, a unique combat system, and deep lore of the world you traverse. Toby Fox doesn't put emphasis on the level design of his games, because that is not the point. Undertale didn't become the critically acclaimed game everyone made it out to be due to its unprecedented level design and by how no one got lost the first time they played the game. No, it was the characters, story, and unique combat that were the highlights. We have to remember that Deltarune isn't what the community wants it to be, it's Toby Fox's vision, with both of the games being linear narrative experiences, with exploration sprinkled in to be less monotonous. Oh yeah, I have to talk about Deltarune. When it comes to gameplay, Chapter 3 serves as a break from the regular formula, by changing the rhythm of the story to something more fast-paced. One core gameplay element of the chapter are the minigames. They take heavy inspiration from early arcade and retro consoles, since Toby Fox is an avid fan of them, and it further adds substance to the theme of the chapter. The fights are the best so far. Tena, Irem, and the Knight are all unique in their own separate ways, and I had a lot of fun with them. The Roaring Knight in particular was my favorite, not only because of the challenge, but more so that it tricks you into lowering your guard after the Tena fight, so that its unexpected appearance has a greater impact on the audience. Here's where Chapter 4 does a complete 180, both in terms of pacing and gameplay. The momentum built by Chapter 3's jaw-dropping ending was killed by placing more emphasis on the relaxing light world part of the game, which is why I think some people felt bored while playing Chapter 4 at first. Don't get me wrong, flashing out the light world was a great decision on Toby's part, in order to remind you that the other characters have normal, ordinary lives outside of their adventures. However, the lack of a break in between does contribute heavily to the boredom. The gameplay here isn't anything crazy, unlike the previous bit, but there are certain things which stand out, like the piano puzzles or the darkness sections, as they tend to form a tension and an anticipation that something you've seen in the dark will jump out at you. The fight with Hammer of Justice was okay. Personally, I wasn't too impressed, unlike in the third chapter. However, where it really shined was the character arc with Susie, which I'll get into later. But there's one last fight in this chapter, which I found utterly disappointing. That being the Titans. A giant letdown from a gameplay perspective, in my opinion. The attacks quickly became repetitive and paled in comparisons with the Knights, that had more variety in attack pattern, and it induced me and many others into a sense of dread. An unstoppable and dangerous force that isn't to be messed with. Not a giant damage sponge that is defeated with the power of friendship. If we do get a rematch with the Titans, I really do hope they get better and more interesting attacks, since right now this feels anticlimactic, for me personally. Toby Fox puts a lot of thought into creating complex and purposeful characters that go way beyond their surface level role. A good example of this is Tenna. A shallow interpretation of his character would be to just say he's the villain of the third act that wants attention. But he's shown to reflect the image of a much simpler time, back when cable was the most readily accessible form of entertainment. A charming time I was fortunate enough to be a part of. He represents how redundant cable entertainment has become in recent years, due in part to the advent of video sharing platforms such as TikTok and YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, if you made it so far, liking the video and subscribing to the channel would be much appreciated, as it enables me to keep making these videos for you to enjoy. Anyway, the character interactions are another great way the game immerses you in its story, and at the same time helps push it forward. To give you an example, during the Legend of Tenna sections, the trio messes around by switching the controller ports to have fun. It's moments like these that are supposed to invoke in you a sense of nostalgia, back to a much simpler time for those who got to experience this era of entertainment. And I'm sure a good portion of you can relate to this. During this time, Susie and Ralsei both grow as characters due to personal struggles. Ralsei at the start of the game believes himself to only be a guide, an aid to the heroes that follows them around, and nothing more than what the prophecy prescribed him as. Throughout the story, he attempts to break free from those shackles, like when he baked a cake for Chris and Susie. Ralsei says it's his first time eating cake, which suggests that he doesn't taste what he cooks, denying himself the ability to enjoy things purely for the sake of making them happy. The prophecy is also a significant part of his personality and role as a character because, as stated earlier, Ralsei is the one that originally speaks about the prophecy. His struggles stem from knowing what fate awaits everyone once the roaring happens, which stops him from making meaningful connections and pushes Chris and Susie away. Ralsei desperately pleads with Susie to let him do everything from now on, just so he can protect you from knowing the dark truth about the final prophecy, yet again showing Ralsei disregarding his own self for our sake. I can't state how complex of a character Ralsei truly is, and I can't do him justice in a few minutes, but if you'd like to see a more in-depth analysis of this and other characters, let me know in the comments and I'll try my best. Speaking of other characters, Gerson has an interesting role in the story. He divulges small bits and pieces about the lore and his own story through his battle. However, Gerson stands out from the rest of the cast. During chapter 4, Susie tries to become something more than the brute of the party by improving her ability to heal. However, each time she gets outshined by Ralsei, because that's his specialty. Quitting seems like the best option to her now, but the old man views it differently. He sees the potential in Susie and shows her how her power, even if not as strong, can still be useful when used in the right condition. This again is shown when fighting Gerson for the axe in the study, and yet again after the Titans appear. The old man encouraged Susie to keep trying to learn new things. He's an integral part of Susie's growth, being shown to act as a good parental role model to her, something she most likely never had. Gerson also has a lot of details built into his character, such as how the name of one of the enemy he recruits in battle, the Gyaa, often representing in Chinese religion the spirit of individuals who can't move on due to improper burial or having some unfinished business left. This parallels Gerson since the letter addressed towards his son represents the undealt matter he has left, and the improper burial is shown by the glass casing with Gerson dust being inside Alvin's office instead of the grave beside the church. This part shows the attention to detail Toby Fox has with his characters, or that I might be looking way too deep into this. We're a few months away from Chapter's 5 release date, and with it comes a lot of speculation on what will the next chapter look like. We can't know for certain right now, but there are hints about it. Let's start by looking at the dialogue in Gerson's fight. He begins explaining the chapters of Lord of the Hammer. As they are based on the prophecy, it's a reliable source of information. In the 5th chapter, named The Field of Pink and Gold, he talks about a vast garden being charred in an inferno of jealousy, and I find this description very interesting. First off, the vast garden can be interpreted as a lot of things. However, by far the most likely, in my opinion, being that the next chapter will take place in Asgore's shop. Therefore, the next line, an inferno of jealousy, represents Asgore being jealous of someone. Okay, but why? Why is this the most likely option? Aside from fitting well into the narrative, based on what I've gathered, flowers are a big part of Asgore's personality. Example of these being the shop he owns, this prophecy panel, as well as his divorced wife being friendly with our skeleton friend. All of the evidence points to one direction, but if there is a thing I've learned while making this video, it's that Toby doesn't like giving direct answers. The thing with Asgore is that he's sort of a comedic relief character. This, however, changed with Chapter 4, which shed a little more light on his character, carving a path for Asgore to show off his part of the story. For example, he conducts an informal investigation at the Holiday's residence to prove something to everyone in town. This is strengthened by the corkboard found in his basement. But it's not yet clear what that something is right now. Maybe it has to do with why he was forced to resign from his post as chief of police. Despite this, I'm more inclined to believe Asgore's story isn't going to take center stage, but rather be a subplot. This is because of how the information is presented so far. Most of it is pretty easy to miss, especially for casual play, but yeah, details that foreshadow certain things in the story aren't too uncommon. However, here it's different. These are not small details. It's, relatively speaking, a great amount of relevant information to keep hidden from the player, so it makes more sense that these scenes wouldn't be integral to the story, but rather to a subplot. Asgore's subplot might not have a direct effect on the story, but it can more freely show his backstory alongside the events which have led to his unfortunate situation, and potentially shed some much needed light on a mystery which had the community on the edge of their seats for the past couple of years. Of course, I'm talking about what happened to December Holiday, an answer we may receive sooner than expected. As I'm sure many of you remember, about 7 months ago, just after the launch of Deltarune, a new website took the internet by storm in late July. Wplace was created by a Brazilian developer named Murilo Matsubara. It's just like r/place on Reddit, only on a much bigger scale. Users can paint using pixels and create all sorts of things, ranging from characters to flags and other things. It was all going well. People from all around were creating communities to create complex pieces of art, but then something happened. Multiple users started complaining about their artworks being griefed. Artwork such as Grass Wonder, a legendary racehorse, had its eyes painted over with a very specific color palette. Additionally, users got annoyed by the overabundance of specific sprite arts and that they're ruining the landscapes. As I'm sure many of you can guess, I'm talking about none other than Deltarune, which freaked out when it realized what was happening. They tried finding an answer to all of this, and soon, screenshots began popping up. It wasn't Deltarune's fans which caused all of this, but a well-known hacker called 4chan. However, some dispute this. So, what really happened? Was it Deltarune, like many claim? Maybe 4chan, since they're pretty infamous for these kinds of things. Or was it somebody else? An entity totally different from what you might expect. Let's go back in time a bit. To late July, more specifically. Deltarune was still pretty hot after its release. The pixelated and easy to reproduce sprites made them pretty popular, which explains why you would see them plastered everywhere. People just drew what they enjoyed, and it's understandable that people got sick of them. Okay, but what about the vandalism? When I searched around the internet, I only managed to find posts and videos of others discussing the situation. But as I dug deeper, I came across a screenshot. Not about 4chan, but a place much more depraved. Yeah, shockingly, there exists a place worse than 4chan on the internet. Soyjack Party is a website some of you may have heard about. It's a website where racism and homophobia, among other things, are commonplace, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Aside from being full of extremists, one of the users is credited for the Antioch high school shooting back in 2025. Among these operations, as they call them, is Operation World War Soy. Their main goal was to harass, offend, and dox as many LGBTQ people as possible, including the staff behind the W-Place project. They drew this sprite of Ralsei at a mass shooting site in Orlando, Florida, and another one at the bridge where a trans girl named Charlotte took her own life back in 2025. This is only a small fraction of what these sick individuals have done across the years, and honestly, it would require its own separate video just to discuss all that they have done. However, after navigating that cesspool of a website, I finally found the original thread where this screenshot came from. And it's not alone. Most of the posts here I cannot show without censoring because of the language. But it genuinely baffles me how degenerate these people are. Now, will something change after unearthing this? Of course not. Most of the damage has already been done, and it's difficult to change how some people perceive media. But my point is, do your own research if you care enough about the topic. Do not believe everything anyone says on the internet. Oh, the hypocrisy. What I think made people resonate with this series altogether are, on one hand, the relatable characters and unique story through which the game is able to make lasting memories. That's what makes it great. But on the other hand, the toxic parts of the fandom really drag the whole experience down, evident by recent events. All things aside, we should stop blaming Toby Fox for taking so long to release updates. Making something isn't hard, it just takes you time and sometimes money. But in this case, the result is, at best, mediocre. That's because a key ingredient is missing from this formula. Passion. That is what creates something amazing, which will stick with people for years to come.